relief, essentially ensuring that we would exclude the EIDL advance when determining forgiveness for PPP loans. We've heard from countless business owners in my district, in Fort Collins and Loveland, who are struggling, who have told us that this provision would provide needed relief to ensure that they can continue to keep their businesses solvent, keep their doors open, serving the people of our great state in Colorado, and of course my colleague in the state of Utah, and small business owners across the country. That provision is in this bill. It's in the updated HEROES Act, alongside so many other important provisions to help small businesses in our country recover. So I say to my colleagues, let's get this done. Let's pass this bill, and let's provide the relief that the American people are counting on us to provide. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady is recognized. Gentlelady reserves.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Schreier.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people in my district continue to struggle with the economic effects of COVID-19. My constituents and small business owners will be so relieved to know that help that they need is one step closer to being here, including more assistance to small businesses, funding for child care and education, enhanced unemployment benefits, and rental assistance. Several of my bills to help children and families have been included in this package as well, including increasing funding for child abuse prevention and more help fighting hunger and boosting access for children to fresh fruits and vegetables. Finally, as a doctor, I'm very happy that my legislation to improve education about vaccines, including a future or many future COVID-19 vaccines, is in this package. It's important that the American people feel confident that whatever vaccine does get approval, it is truly safe and effective. And that education begins now. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back.
I reserve my time.
Gentlelady reserves. The gentlewoman from New York.
Speaker, I am delighted to yield 5 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, the chair of the Committee on Financial Services, Ms. Waters.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of the House amendment to H.R. 925, the updated version of the HEROES Act. Mr. Speaker, Democrats have been working every single day to respond to this pandemic and provide much-needed relief and protection for families across the country. 139 days ago, House Democrats voted to pass the HEROES Act. Unfortunately, President Trump, Mitch McConnell, and Senate Republicans have blocked the bill and prevented the essential relief the legislation provides from reaching our neighborhoods and our communities. Meanwhile, the nation continues to suffer during this crisis. Even before this pandemic, over 500,000 people in the United States were experiencing homelessness, including more than 50,000 families with children. It is likely that this number has grown significantly due to the pandemic. We also continue to head toward a catastrophic eviction crisis as families struggle to pay rent and months of unpaid back rent pile up. Today, the rent is due, but an estimated 14.2 million renter households cannot pay it and are at risk of eviction and homelessness. In my state of California, there are 1.7 million renter households who are behind on rent and facing eviction. At the same time, more than 8 million homeowners, including almost 780,000 homeowners in California, have already fallen behind on their mortgage payments. Making matters worse, over 1 million small businesses have closed. To address the ongoing crisis, the updated HEROES Act creates a $50 billion emergency rental assistance fund and a $21 billion homeowner assistance fund, and provides $5 billion in funding for homeless services providers. Through no fault of their own, millions of people are also unable to make payments on credit cards, car loans, and their mortgages or rent. By suspending negative credit reporting during COVID-19 period, the HEROES Act ensures that these innocent consumers do not suffer further damage. The HEROES Act also suspends debt collection for consumers, small businesses, and nonprofits during this pandemic. Additionally, private student loan borrowers in economic distress who are disproportionately people of color will get up to $10,000 in debt relief under the bill. The nation continues to face shortages of essential medical supplies and equipment. For example, our heroic healthcare workers are still reusing N95 respirator masks at a time when cases of COVID-19 continue to rise. The HEROES Act strengthens the Defense Production Act to supercharge the production of these supplies and works to ensure that funds are directed to alleviate these shortages. The updated HEROES Act also builds upon my efforts and those of members of my committee to remove barriers for community development financial institutions, that is the CDFIs, and minority depository institutions, better known as MDIs, trying to serve low and moderate income communities during the pandemic. For example, the bill provides $15 billion in capital and other assistance for CDFIs and MDIs to bolster financing activity in minority communities, which have been hardest hit by this pandemic. I'm so pleased that the bill provides another round of stimulus payments for families, additional funding for small businesses, including $120 billion for restaurants and airport concessionaires. And importantly, the bill directs the Treasury Secretary to work with the global community to immediately provide $2 trillion in relief through the International Monetary Fund, which will immediately support developing countries that are experiencing some of the worst effects of COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, this bill isn't everything that is needed, but it is a good faith effort to bridge the gap in negotiations with our Republican colleagues. It's time for Republicans to stop blocking coronavirus relief and support this legislation. And I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you very much.
The gentlelady yields back.
I reserve my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentlewoman
Mr.
from New York.
Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Speaker, thank you. I hope my time has not started to run. Thank the Speaker. The American people cannot wait. Help is on the way. And the only thing I can ask of my Republican friends is to take a walk in neighborhoods, in their districts, around the nation, where mothers and fathers are waiting on a disbursement needed to put food on their table. This $2.2 trillion bill is going to help businesses, nonprofits, faith institutions with the PPP. It's going to give us protective equipment. Yes, the engine of our communities, small independent restaurants, are getting close to $120 million. More funds to bolster education and child care. Schools that cannot open because they do not have the resources. Money for testing. I've opened 33 testing sites in our neighborhoods. Contact tracing, of course. Making sure that cities and counties, essential workers, and hazardous pay is paid. Is anyone asking the American people? They are suffering and they need this resource to help them. To fight COVID-19, we've got to stop the evictions, stop the foreclosure, give health care, close food insecurity, make sure we take care of small businesses, education, and give our people a lifeline. The American people can't wait. Now is the time to help them vote on the HEROES Act for this money and this relief. I yield back.
I reserve my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentlewoman from New York is
Mr. Speaker,
recognized.
I'm delighted to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Garcia.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank Representative Lowy for this minute. I rise in strong support of the revised HEROES Act because my community cannot wait. School teachers, flight attendants, and working families are facing layoffs, and they need our help now. Tenants and homeowners facing evictions and homelessness need our support now. Immigrants with U.S.-born children and U.S. citizens who never received the stimulus check need our support now. We passed the HEROES Act 4.5 months ago. Republicans in the Senate wouldn't even consider it, but this is a bill that we're offering is a compromise, and it is common ground, because just like my colleagues across the aisle, I'm headed home to my constituents, and I don't want them to think that we failed them. House Democrats have done our jobs. We passed relief, and we're doing it again. It is the President and Senate Republicans who refuse to pass relief that have failed. Give the American people the relief that they need so urgently. I urge adoption.
Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
I reserve my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I am
Mr. Horsford.
Oh. I am delighted to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Horsford. Oh, Miss. I'm even more delighted. It's a very special delight for me to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlewoman from California, the Speaker of the House, Ms. Pelosi.
Madam Speaker is recognized.
Madam Chair, for yielding. Mr. Speaker, thank you for yielding. I am honored to be on the floor today to support a bill brought to the floor by the distinguished chair of the Appropriations Committee, Nita Lowey of New York. Her service on that committee for decades has been a blessing to our country. I have seen firsthand her leadership for America's families, for our country, for our communities, and for our children. We have worked together on women's issues, HIV, AIDS, you name it, every subject, minority health issues, and the rest. And here we are today with this legislation that is so needed for our country. And it's really hard to understand what it is that people would oppose in the legislation. The Appropriations Committee has done a masterful job. You have been a maestro, Madam Chair, as well as your staff, for putting this legislation together. And I'm in Congress because of children. I'm always here for the children, and I wanted to start my comments by saying what this legislation would mean to a family of four. And a family of four, this is a lifeline for workers and families who are facing this coronavirus disaster. For a family of four earning $24,000, HEROES 2 would mean direct payments, a $3,400 direct payment, unemployment benefits, $600 per week, and enhanced UI benefits, tax credits up to $5,920 through the EITC, and fully refundable $4,000 tax credit equaling additional $1,200 in refund. And I mention that because some have said, well, why don't you like this other bill and that bill? None of that I just said, the tax credits, the earned income tax credit, the fully refundable child tax credit, none of that is in any of the Republican bills. None of the bills that you have seen other than this bill has that consideration for children. So when people say, well, why don't you take a half a loaf? Because the children need more than the heel of a loaf of bread. They need the best we can do for them. It has an increase in SNAP benefits for over an increase of $100 a month in most states, plus rental assistance and the ACA premium subsidy. This immediately gives immediate eligibility for parents losing their jobs for the maximum health insurance premium subsidy under the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, a benefit worth of $1,386 per month. Now, we can't do everything in a bill that is coronavirus focused. We have challenges in our country that we must address in a bigger way. But what we have here is coronavirus centric. And that is important to note because people are suffering in a different way. We have, for this family, many of these families are food insecure. Millions of children in our country are food insecure, and this HEROES Act addresses some of that. So I want, again, in addition to thanking Nita Lowey for her leadership, salute Bobby Scott for our children and for our workers. We want our children to go back to school, but we want them to do so in a way that is safe. And Bobby Scott has provisions in here for that, whether it's actually in school, whether it's virtual, or whether it's hybrid, whether it calls for the ventilation that is needed. And again, for their fathers and mothers to go to work in a safe atmosphere by having strong OSHA language in here to protect workers. That's not in the Republican bill. That is not in the Republican bill. And Energy and Commerce Chairman Frank Pallone, not only we can come to terms on money, but the language is what is important. And Frank Pallone, 4.5 months ago, and even before that, proposed a strategic plan that I'm sure he will talk about, and I thank him for it, a strategic plan in order to crush the virus. Crush the virus. The Republicans want to crush the Affordable Care Act at a time of the pandemic, going into the Supreme Court to crush the Affordable Care Act. Why don't we just come together, crush the virus? We can open our economy and our schools in a safe way. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman Pallone, for your leadership. The Natural Resources Committee, Congressman Chairman Raul Grijalva, so important what he has in the legislation, especially addressing the needs of our tribal communities in our country, which are so disproportionately affected by the coronavirus. And I thank him for his leadership in that and so many other ways in the legislation, but that being such an essential piece. The Oversight Committee, Carolyn Maloney, for her leadership, for the Postal Service, and I think we finally have gotten the message across on the Postal Service, so hopefully we'll get some cooperation there, but not yet on the census. The census is so important, the lifeblood of who we are, the DNA of America, the people, and we're having a problem with that. It's not even about money, it's about policy. So I thank her for ongoing leadership, 4 years, culminating in this legislation now. Small Business Chairwoman Nydia Velázquez, so knowledgeable, for a long time, decades, the chair or ranking member of the Small Business Committee. She knows about women and minority-owned businesses and how the most optimistic thing a person can do is to, I say, plant a flag for small business. A small business, how more optimistic can you be than to start a small business? Perhaps get married, but you kind of know what your risks are there. But in a small business, so needed the help in here, the PPP, other help for hospitals, for restaurants. Hospitals are Mr. Pallone's section of the bill, and the language for the providers are there. But back to Nydia Velázquez. This is a big piece of the bill. So what do we do for PPP? What do we do for restaurants? What do we do for arenas, small spaces around the country for entertainment and bringing people together, spatially distanced, of course? How do we balance all of this? That is language that we are trying to resolve in our negotiations. And I'm optimistic that we could get there, but we couldn't do the best job possible without the leadership of Nydia Velázquez. And in the Veterans Affairs Committee, I thank Mark Chicano for his important work for our veterans and the resources we have in the bill for our veterans. And Ways and Means Committee, Chairman Richie Neal, who just has been brilliant in how we put money in people's pockets. Money in people's pockets with the direct payments and some of the other tax provisions that I talked about earlier for children that have no reference even in the Republican bill as far as the children are concerned. And again, my top priority are the children. And I want to thank Peter DeFazio, the chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, for his leadership in having the language in here, not just for the airlines, which is very, very important. And that's important because it's an essential, it's important, but people should know when they say, well, why should we help airline employees? Well, we do because they have to have special certification and special security clearances and the rest. So if they lose a job and come back, it's months before they can come back, not like any other industry. So that's important. But Mr. DeFazio also has an important chunk of money, a lot, in the bill for transportation writ large in some other ways that is urgent and coronavirus connected, and that's very important as well, and I thank him for his leadership in that regard. But read the bill, and so much of it is, and that's why I salute the chairs, this is about having scientific, institutional, academic basis for the amount of money that we are asking for. We had a bigger bill, 3.4. The other side said, well, we're not going there. So we came down $1 trillion. No, not yet. We came down another $200 billion, not by violating any of our priorities, but by shortening the time, just shortening the time frame and moving some issues to the other arena that Madam Chair works in, and that is in our regular appropriations bills as we go forward. So this is really important. And so one bill is not as good as another. Why not take something instead of nothing? Why should that be the standard for America's children? We have to fight for the best that we can get for them, and I feel certain that we will have a level of success. But people have to know. People have to know. One of the problems that I have, the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans on this issue, is in the Republican bill, they have a $150 billion benefit for some of the wealthiest people in our country, $150 billion. In our bill, we strove to have $149 billion for our children, for the Earned Income Tax Credit, for the full refundability and the rest. No. So we took it down to $54 billion, and we're still waiting to see if we get acceptance of that. $150 billion for the wealthiest people in America, tax net operating loss. 149 for America's working families, no. We took it down 54. We took off $100 billion to gain agreement. So this is not just a money debate and a language debate. It's a values debate. It's important for people to know that what this fight is about. So it's called the HEROES Act, and it's called the HEROES Act because we are honoring our heroes. Everybody wants to wave and have cutouts at the game and all of that. Honor our heroes by making sure they have their jobs. These are our healthcare workers, our police and fire, first responders, our teachers, our teachers, our teachers, our transportation, our sanitation, our food workers, and the rest, who make our lives function. We couldn't do what we do without them doing what they're doing. Many of them are risking their lives to save lives, and now they may lose their jobs because why? Let the states go bankrupt. That's what Mitch McConnell said. Let the states go bankrupt. And what the president said, well, those blue states, why should we send them any money? Because the people have needs, and we have to meet them. And the sooner that if we lose all authority to thank them if we say, that's nice, but we don't care if you lose your job. You can go on unemployment insurance. what have we accomplished? We've diminished the services to people, probably raised taxes in some of these places, and people lose their jobs. Over 1 million, closer to 1.5 million of state and locals have lost their jobs already, and it's predicted that 3.5 million more if we don't act on this. So this is our important pillar of this, supporting state and local government. That's one of our areas that we are, shall we say, negotiating. Next, crush the virus. Mr. Pullman has the plan. Crush the virus, so that we can, again, open our schools, our businesses, our economy. And we're long overdue. Well, this bill's 4.5 months old, because at the time we passed it, the leader in the Senate, Mr. McConnell, pushed the pause button. He pushed the pause button. We got to wait and see. And since that time, over 100,000 people have died. Hundreds of thousands have become infected, because he pushed the pause button and said, let the states go bankrupt. So this is what we come here to do, to debate policy on how we think we can best meet the needs of the American people. And we think we can best meet the needs of the American people with the provisions in this bill. And I thought it was really important for us to formally put forth the work of our chairs, which is excellent, which meets the needs. Maxine, you heard from earlier, families on the verge of eviction. Families on the verge of eviction get support in this legislation. More people who can't pay their mortgages are helped in this legislation. And I thank Maxine for that, as Chairwoman Waters, for that, as well as her work on the restaurant legislation to help many more small businesses get help from this legislation. So this is a tall order. People said, well, we should have a skinny package. No, we don't got a skinny problem. We got a massive problem. No, you don't believe so much more in the role of government than we do. Let's come together, find our common ground. But let's not just say, let the children pay the price because we want to have a bipartisan bill. No, we don't want the children to pay the price so we can have a bipartisan bill. We want to have a bipartisan bill that supports the children. I feel confident that we can do that. But we can't do that if we take the path of least resistance and just say, let's do whatever they put forth. That's doing their bill. That's not doing the people's work. So again, over 200,000 people. We know 207,000 people have already died. More than 7 million affected. 1 million people in the world have died. We in this legislation, because of Ms. Lowy's, Chairwoman Lowy's expertise, respect in the world. We have provisions in the bill that affect our relationship in terms of how we fight the COVID virus globally, because none of us is safe unless we make sure that all of us are safe. So I urge a yes vote on this legislation. It goes a long way to doing what we need to do. It sets an example. But as I say, we cut a lot out by just cutting the time on it. Pretty soon we'll have to have legislation again. That'll be probably next year, and this legislation goes to early next year rather than later next year. But the timing is really important to do it now. It's long overdue. It is what is needed, what this country needs. And again, I want to say thank you. Thank you to our heroes. We thank you by making sure you have the job, the benefits, and the rest that you have earned, and not just giving you empty gratitude, but the gratitude of supporting you in your important roles that you play in our lives, with assurance that you will have your job as you risk your lives to save lives, and that your children will be able to go to school safely, whether it's virtual, actual, or hybrid, and that when they do that, they will do so in a way that you have enabled, because Education has some funds in here, but without state and local, the education function cannot be borne out to its fullest extent. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time. Again, I thank the distinguished chairwoman, and I have great excitement because of the work of our chairs about the quality of this legislation and the necessity that we come as close to it in a negotiation for the children. Thank you.
I reserve my time.
Gentlelady from Texas reserves. Gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Connecticut, the chair of the Labor, Health, Human Services, and Education Subcommittee, the hardworking, distinguished leader in all these issues, Ms. DeLauro.
The gentlelady is recognized.
The people of Connecticut and of the United States deserve no less than the full support of the federal government to get them to the dawn of a recovery. While the House passed a comprehensive bill for the American people back in May, the Senate has failed to act. So we advanced this $2.2 trillion package. It includes $2.7 billion for Connecticut to protect lives, livelihoods, and the life of our democracy. As chair of the Labor, Health, and Human Services Education Appropriations Subcommittee, I am proud of the investments for patients, working people, children, seniors in public education. For health, we provide $75 billion for coronavirus testing, contact tracing, and isolation measures, and $28 billion for a safe and effective vaccine. For working people, we must save jobs, protect workers and their families. So we strengthen, expand, and protect emergency paid leave. We restore the expanded $600 unemployment benefit through the end of January, and we continue to support work-share programs. For children and families, we must not allow a generation to be lost or to let their bright futures darken. We provide $182 billion for K-12 education, nearly $39 billion for post-secondary, along with the Child Care is Essential Act, which I introduced with Chairman Bobby Scott, for $15 billion to save the child care industry, and then my legislation to make the child tax credit fully refundable, to make it accessible to all, including the one-third previously excluded, including half of Black and Latinx children. I am proud of the provisions to increase the maximum SNAP benefit by 15% to aid nutrition programs, food banks, farmers and producers, as well as small businesses and restaurants. So let us put politics second. Let us put people first. Let us vote yes on this relief bill for the people of this country, for the seniors, for the children, and those who every day are looking toward the federal government because they are in desperate shape and they need our help. They need this legislation. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Texas reserves.
I'd like to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, the Majority Leader, Mr. Hoyer.
The gentleman is recognized. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of this legislation. I've heard my Republican friends lament the fact that we have things in this bill that they don't like, and apparently that the Senate doesn't like. I've been here long enough to know and to serve when the Republicans were in charge. They passed bill after bill with partisan provisions that they knew President Obama wouldn't sign and that they could not pass the United States Senate because they couldn't get enough Democrats to get to 60 votes. They knew that. So both sides passed legislation that they think is good, notwithstanding the fact that the other side does not agree with some of the provisions in the bill. But, Mr. Speaker, This bill responds to the needs of the American people at a time of crisis. The House passed the HEROES Act more than 4.5 months ago. Normally, what would happen was when a bill goes to the Senate, they would pass a bill of their own unless they believed, ladies and gentlemen of America, you're on your own. And states, as Senator McConnell said, you can go bankrupt. The minority wait and see what happens. And we waited. And we waited. And we waited. And 120,000 additional Americans died since May 15th. How long are we going to wait? The House did its job in May for the American people, yet the Republican Senate and President Trump have still not done theirs. And they talk about compromise on that side of the aisle and working together. And so what did the Republican leader of the Senate do? There was a $1 trillion offer on the table, so he came back with a compromise and cut it in half to $500. And the only reason that bill got a majority of the United States Senate, Republicans didn't get a majority of the United States, it did because there are enough Republicans, is because they thought it wouldn't go anywhere. It was a message bill. That's the only reason it passed. With 51, didn't pass, of course, because it needed 60. Now let me tell you what John Boehner did and what Paul Ryan did when the Freedom Caucus wouldn't give you the votes, Mr. Speaker, for the Republicans to pass legislation that they knew was needed. The debt limit, fiscal bills, they knew they were needed. So what did John Boehner do? He walked across the aisle, talked to the Speaker, talked to me, and said, we need some votes. And we made a deal. And the chair, or the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, is one of those people who wants the House to work. I'm a friend of hers, and I respect her, because she is a member that I've experienced who wants to make it work. But Senator McConnell doesn't walk across the aisle and say, let's make a compromise. So don't preach at us, Mr. Speaker. Don't preach at us about reaching across the aisle. We've seen tax bills that slam, bam, there it goes. And so you come up with a bill. Negotiations are ongoing right now, and I want to congratulate the Speaker of the House. She's been in Washington more than any of the rest of us in the last 6 months. I know that because I talk to her on a regular basis, trying to get this to work, trying to make a deal. And I applaud Secretary Mnuchin. There's some others who don't make deals and who have a history of not making deals and have a history of undermining deals that Paul Ryan wanted to make or that John Boehner wanted to make, not Democrats. But negotiations are continuing, and I hope we will reach a bipartisan agreement. And frankly, if we had reached a bipartisan agreement yesterday, we would not have this bill on the floor. If we'd reached it the day before, we wouldn't have this bill on the floor. Because we know we want a bill signed. But we also know we want to let the American people where we stand. Not for just one bill that helps this group or that group or the other group, but all Americans who are suffering and are at risk. So we believe that this bill is a reasonable compromise. That's why today we will pass a bill that achieves the goals of the HEROES Act and represents a reasonable compromise. And you're saying to yourselves, some people, Mr. Speaker, are saying to themselves, oh, this isn't reasonable. Remember, McConnell goes from $1 trillion down to half a trillion, which clearly did not cover the needs. Every economist tells us that. Notwithstanding the passage of this bill, House Democrats will continue to negotiate to reach the kind of bipartisan agreement that we believe is necessary to help Americans get through this crisis. The airlines need the money now. And we ought to be that close. But our position is clear. The federal government cannot shirk its responsibilities to the people it serves. Not just some of the people. We have in this bill the help for small businesses that people on that side of the aisle have been talking about. We're talking about it. They need it. It includes support for state, local, tribal, and territorial governments. I have a letter here, and letters can be sent from the National Governors Association only if they're unanimous, which says, every major economist, regardless of party or ideological bent, came to the same conclusion after the 2007-2009 financial crisis. The lack of support for state and local governments slowed the nation's economic growth for more than a decade. As we begin to recover and rebuild from COVID-19 crisis, unanimously, Republican and Democratic governors, we cannot afford to repeat the mistakes of the past, i.e. not giving aid to state and local governments. That's what the governors are saying. All of them, Republican and Democrat. My governor is a Republican. His name is Hogan. His father served here in the House of Representatives. And he is one of those who came up with Mr. Cuomo the amount of money that was needed by state and local governments. Why do we aid state and local governments? Because they hire police. We hear about defunding police. They're hemorrhaging revenues and they cannot support the personnel they have. And police, fire, emergency medical response teams, sanitation workers, nurses at public hospitals, all of these, state and local, are critical if we're going to solve the economic problem and the COVID-19 problem. While the HEROES Act provided the level of fiscal support unanimously recommended by the National Governors Association, I want to repeat that. This is not a Democratic idea. Unanimously, the governors of our states, red and blue states, said we need this money. The bill recognized the reality that faced with the Senate Republican leader who suggested the states go bankrupt, that level might not be possible. So we reduced that sum in half. Cut out $1 trillion of the proposal we thought had merit, actually $1.2 trillion. So we offer a compromise. 1-year funding, cut it in half, that which it was in the HEROES Act, yet still sufficient to get us into the next year. This legislation renews the expanded emergency unemployment insurance benefits that millions of people are relying on. And by the way, it goes to them, but what do they do with it, Mr. Speaker? They spend it in the economy at those small businesses that you're worried about. All of us are worried about. And we give a family the sustenance that they need to support themselves and the family, they go spend it. Where? Small businesses and large businesses. We give that $600 a week through the end of January 2021, which will help small businesses and the general economy. It will provide another round of direct payments to Americans of $1,200 for each individual adult and $500 for 2 eligible dependents to help families make ends meet. I think all of you have voted. There might have been a voice vote in the CARES Act, but everybody voted for it. And we're making sure college students aren't left out. Our bill offers a second round of paycheck protection program to help small businesses remain viable through the pandemic and include additional support for workers in the airlines, restaurant, and live entertainment industries. It covers a whole lot of folks that need help. And for 4.5 months after we passed the bill, the Senate has not sent us a single piece of legislation. Not a single piece. because Senator McConnell will not compromise so he can get votes from the Democrats, which he needs to pass a bill, just as John Boehner and Paul Ryan crossed the aisle because they needed the votes for bills they thought were critically important for our country. To help reopen the economy safely, the bill also includes $75 billion for testing and contact tracing and other public health initiatives, and it provides a lifeline to the Postal Service. Now, I know that may be objectionable to some people because they may want to see the mail delayed for whatever reasons. I want to thank Chairwoman Lowy and of the Appropriations Committee and all other chairs and members of all of our committees who worked hard on this legislation. It includes input and contribution from many members, including many of our outstanding freshmen. This bill represents a substantial reduction, 35% reduction. I tell my friends who served on the Appropriations Committee with me, if I was in charge and we wanted to make a deal and I said, well, I'll come down 35%, they would have taken it like that. It's approximately the level of funding, somebody mentioned $2 trillion. The CARES Act was $2.2 trillion, and all of you voted for it. That was a voice vote, unanimous, so I don't know specifically whether you were here or whether you would say no, no, silently I voted no. Nobody voted against it. $2.2 trillion. It's extraordinary the amount of money we're spending, Mr. Speaker. But then again, no one in this body of whatever age has experienced the crisis that America has found itself in over the last 8 months. No one. And every economist said it required the kind of response. And that's why we voted for 4 bills in a bipartisan way. But then the leadership on the other side of the aisle, Mr. Speaker, said, let's wait and see what happens. And as I said, 120,000 people have died. That's what happened. We passed an emergency supplemental appropriation bill, 415-2. We passed the Families First Act, 363-40. We passed the CARES Act by voice vote. Nobody voted against it, at least audibly. And the Paycheck Protection Program and Health Care Enhancement Act was passed on the House on April 23rd by a vote of 383-5. What's changed? The politics have changed. The needs, Mr. Speaker, have not changed. All 4 of those bills passed the Senate and were signed into law. Some passed by unanimous consent by the United States Senate. I urge President Trump and Senate Republicans to work with us to reach bipartisan agreement without further delay. Yes, we have differences. But we have great needs. And I agree with those on the other side of the aisle and on this side of the aisle who said we must meet those needs if we're going to keep our economy going, keep our families intact, and make sure that we have jobs for the future. Millions of American families, workers, and small business owners are looking to Congress for help. Let us, Mr. Speaker, come together, as we have 4 times, came together, overwhelmingly said, not, this is a lot of money. It is a lot of money. I am boggled by the figures that we're dealing with. But I'm also boggled by the challenge that we confront. This bill represents a significant compromise while addressing the priorities we share. Mr. Speaker, I hope we can show the American people that we can come together to govern responsibly in this crisis and provided much-needed relief to the people we serve. People pick out individual items in this bill and unfortunately deeply mischaracterize some of them. Fake facts are being debated on this floor, Mr. Speaker. I don't have the time to go into all those fake facts. One of them, though, was we're defunding the police. There was $600 million in the COPS program in the HEROES bill. And then subsequently we passed a appropriation bill at $343 million. And by the way, the Senate hasn't passed a single bill to fund anything. Anything. Mr. Speaker, what did the president do? The president zero funded, if you check your budget, zero funded the COPS program. Zero funded it. Check it out. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote for this bill. And I guarantee you that we're going to continue tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow and try to get an agreement that we can pass the House, the Senate, and that the President will sign. Because we understand the American people are in need. That is what this bill does, responds to them. If the Senate doesn't like it, have them pass a bill, let us go to conference, let's get it done, and then we'll be here to do it every day. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
I yield the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gonzalez, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in opposition to the legislation before us today. The gentleman was referencing the budget. We're still waiting for his budget. We'll take it whenever he's ready. Absolutely not. Let's be clear about what we are doing today. We are going to be voting on a piece of legislation that was not negotiated, will be dead on arrival in the Senate, and will do nothing for the millions of Americans who are relying on this body to find a solution. This bill before us today is about wanting the politics of the issue more than results. This is a bill that rejects $1.7 trillion in bipartisan COVID aid that will help families navigate some of the most difficult moments of their lives in favor of $0 that will help absolutely no one except for a handful of politicians who want the message more than the result. What a disgrace. And the sad truth is my colleagues know exactly what they are doing. How in good faith could they say that this legislation, which takes steps to federalize U.S. elections, that provides a tax break for millionaires and billionaires in blue states, that's right, and that directs ICE to release individuals in custody, is an attempt to help their constituents knowing full well that these provisions will not be signed into law. Just this morning, the Speaker of the House said that we are not only having a dollars debate, we are having a values debate. Well, I've heard from the people of Ohio's 16th District and many around the country at what they value since this pandemic broke out. My constituents value a Congress that puts the people over the politics. They value a Congress that could care less about which party wins or loses an election, so long as in their greatest moments of need, their government is there for them. The people are sick and tired of watching this town fight like cats and dogs over who, quote unquote, wins the day. They want to win, and they win when we do our job. That is not what is happening today, and the American people are rightly disgusted. Just 2 weeks ago, my colleagues in the Problem Solvers Caucus, with 25 members from each side of the aisle, put forward a proposal that showed that we can and should work together on a proposal that keeps our small businesses open, protects our children in schools, helps those who are still unemployed, and offers additional aid to states and localities. I heard from people across all sides of the political spectrum that this caucus and our package gave them hope that Congress could actually do something for a change. And yet here we are.
Gentleman's time has expired.
One more minute. Thank you. And yet here we are, ready to let down the people we serve yet again. Despite all of this, there remains a path forward to a solution. But it will take leadership on both sides of the aisle to cast aside their partisan hats and negotiate in good faith. And let me be clear in saying that leadership doesn't need to just come from our elected party leaders. Each member of the House has a say in how they choose to vote today. A yes vote is for the status quo, political messaging, and nothing for the American people. A no vote is a recognition that there is more work to be done and that there is still an opportunity for us to act in the best interests of our constituents. We have to deliver. It's time. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased to yield 5 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, the chairman of the Committee on Energy and Commerce, a member of my class in the Congress, Mr. Pallone.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the chairwoman, and I really want to commend you for putting together a bill which, while it reduces the amount of money from the original HEROES Act, in my opinion, because of the lessons we've learned in the last few weeks, improves the HEROES Act because of what we've learned. And I know that's not an easy task, Madam Chair. I know that is not an easy task of what you've accomplished here today. So I want to congratulate you. But I also want to say, in response to my colleague on the other side from Ohio, this is a serious attempt to put something forward that we believe that the Republicans can support. Now, maybe they're not going to do it today, but I just want to say that our Speaker, and when I say our, I mean the Speaker, because she is, the Speaker for the entire House and the entire country, has worked so hard over the last few weeks and months to try to come together with the Republicans. She just met yesterday, and maybe even today again, with Mr. Mucher from the White House. And to suggest in any way that this is anything other than a serious attempt by Democrats to put forward something that we think the Republicans can ultimately adopt or come close to what they would ultimately support, I think is unfortunate, because that's what we're doing here today. I want to go back to what Speaker Pelosi said earlier when she said that what we're really trying to do is crush the virus. And I want to talk about that because much of that language that would accomplish that comes from the Energy and Commerce Committee that I chair. This is the United States of America. I know we're elected from individual districts, but we come here to represent the whole country. The fact of the matter is the only way that we can crush this virus and end this pandemic is if we work together on a national level to accomplish it. And so what we say in the HEROES Act, both the old one and the new one, is that we need a national plan, and we need a way to bring forth that national plan. What's happening now is every state competes. I get so mad when I watch the TV and they say, oh, Ohio's doing better this week, or New Jersey's doing worse this week. That's not what this is about. This has to be a united effort. It's the United States of America. And that's not what we have right now, because each state is competing for testing, competing for medical supplies, deciding on an individual basis. The hospitals even compete between themselves. And that's not the way it should be. So what we say in the HEROES Act, and it's carried forth again in this legislation today, is a national plan, someone in charge at a national level, I'll call it a supply czar for the supply chain, that sets parameters, if you will, for how to crush the virus. Guidelines for the schools, how you should wear masks. Not necessarily all the details, but essentially a national plan. And then delivers the testing supplies, the medical supplies, and ultimately the vaccine. One of the things that's such an improvement in this bill is not only do we continue the $75 billion for testing and contact tracing and quarantine, but we also provide another $25 or $6 billion for distribution and development and awareness of the vaccine when it's eventually developed. Because, again, this has to be done equitably. It has to be done nationally. And that's what I really want to stress today. I don't necessarily need to use all my time, Madam Chair, because I want to stress that we have to do this together. And that's what this bill puts forward. Now, let me just say in addition to that, because I do want to mention a few other things. We have $2 billion in new funding to get essential workers their protective personnel and work equipment that they need. We also have new provisions to address insurance companies declining to cover COVID testing. In the CARES Act, we said that everyone should be able to get a test for free, no out-of-pocket expense. The bill extends that to the treatment, to the drugs, and the vaccine. But the insurance companies, in many cases, are not doing that. So we want to make it quite clear that they have to cover it free, and there's no out-of-pocket expense. And that would be true for the treatment. That would be true for the vaccination as well. Again, we're one country. I can't stress that enough. Now, the other thing that is a major problem, and I want to mention it briefly, is the ability to connect to the internet. Because the bottom line right now is if you're not in school and you're learning remotely or you're working remotely, you need to have an internet connection. And there's a lot of inequality with that. that around the country too. So the legislation addresses the digital divide by providing $12 billion to schools and libraries for distance learning, for remote learning. We also continue to help low-income households afford internet service by saying they have to have a discount for service by $50 a month. And we have to continue and enhance the Lifeline program, which helps people of low income pay the bills for those internet connections. And the last thing I want to mention also is, finally, we also prevent the shutoffs for any kind of utilities, water service and other shutoffs, because that's important as well. So thank you again, Madam Chair, for the time, and I yield back to the Speaker.
Gentlelady is recognized.
It's my honor to yield the gentleman from California, the Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I just listened to the last speaker. Mr. Speaker, he said he had a bill that he thought and hoped maybe the Republicans could support. Then he used the word united. You know the easiest way to know if Republicans support it? Ask them. Let them in the room. Actually work with them. That's probably a quicker way. The united part's a little difficult if you want to unite people and you leave them out. So let me recap. Having been the leader on this side of the aisle, having worked on numerous COVID relief bills, let's recap what we have gone through each and every time we tried to bring America relief. And you know what? Let's not take my word for it. Let's just read headlines. I think that'll work best. March 22nd, the New York Times. Emergency Economic Rescue Plan in limbo as Democrats block action. Yes, that was the New York Times. That was March 22nd. So let's go to April 9th. Let's go to the NPR. Senate Democrats block GOP effort to boost small business aid. A week later, we watched the Speaker of this House appear on Late Show bragging about blocking the relief while eating high-end ice cream. For reference, there were 22 million unemployed Americans at that time. August 3rd, CBS News says Democrats reject White House offer for short-term extension of unemployment benefits. Let's go to September 10th. Politico. Senate Democrats block Republican COVID relief bill. That's weird. All those headlines, I never heard united. I did hear blocking. I did see the Speaker. Now let me tell you a little bit of my personal experience. When we wanted to do the CARES Act, the Senate worked with Republicans and Democrats by committee. They put the bill together. You listen to Leader Schumer that night said, yes, we're ready to go. The bill is prepared. I took the red eye and flew back. The Speaker did too. We went into the meeting together. And you know what? Just read one of these headlines. The Speaker was able to stop it for a whole nother week. How many people were laid off that week? But you know what? There was change in the bill. The arts and the Kennedy Center got a little more. But that was the only thing. And then we were able to pass it. And in there, we were able to produce the PPP for small businesses. Allowed you to pay your rent, your utilities, but you took that money and you paid your employees. Why were you paying your employees? Because government shut down your business. Was it successful? Whoa, was it successful. Did it go to the owner? No, it went to the people. It went to the workers. 50 million workers were saved. It was so powerful, so successful that the money was running out. So you know what? The Treasury Secretary sent a letter to us and said, you don't need to change anything. Just add a little more money because it's so successful and saving so many jobs. Well, we got our answer. One person stopped it all. And she did it on the Late Show for all of America to see. You remember her smiling as she opened that refrigerator and denied those 22 million people that they were going to join those unemployment lines, and she was going to smile about it because she had her ice cream. And you know what happened? I listened to the Speaker's words. She said, you know what? We're going to get this done. We're not going to leave because she has all the power of whether we stay in here and do our job or not. So it doesn't matter if 1/3 on the other side stays home and votes by proxy and still gets their paycheck. She had everybody leave. But then I had hope. I had hope those who were unemployed. I had hope for those who wanted to go back to school and needed the money. Because the Speaker called an emergency meeting, forced us to come back here. So I thought maybe she changed. Maybe actually what she said she meant this time. So she was going to force Congress back, and she did. And you know what? 1/3 on the other side didn't show because they didn't think it was an emergency. Was it about COVID relief? Was it about the American people who were hurting? No, 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 no. It was about the post office. It was political. So we should have everybody come back. And you know, when you're in the minority, there's only certain rules you have and certain options to put something on the floor. So you know what the Republicans chose to do that day when the Democrats chose to talk about the post office? We put COVID relief on the floor. So there was an option. There was an opportunity. The power of the Speaker rose again. She put her thumb down and everybody else on the other side followed. So you know what? The American public lost that day too. They lost one more time. The facts speak for themselves. The common denominator in holding up relief for the American people is very simple. Speaker Pelosi. She spent the last several months stonewalling negotiations instead of working to solve problems. You know why we're here today? Because the Republicans put a discharge petition on the floor. I wonder why we got outlet early last Friday. The discharge petition must have become ripe where people could sign it. When her members revolted and she responded by recycling an old, unrelated liberal wish list from her first bill. Now, at a time when 837 more Americans are filing for unemployment and small businesses are closing permanently, she's wasting Americans' time on yet another multi-trillion-dollar special interest bailout that rewards K Street, not Main Street. Today's so-called compromise isn't realistic or responsible. It's the Pelosi pipe dream 2.0, and it's filled with the same radical, reckless, and ridiculous ideas as the first bill. Instead of prioritizing new money for small businesses through the Paycheck Protection Program, it provides a massive tax break to the millionaires and billionaires that are totally unrelated to the coronavirus. Now let me give you an example. Let's take one person in America that's going to benefit this. You actually ought to rename this bill the Mike Bloomberg bill. Mike Bloomberg is reported to have made $3.5 billion last year. He lives in New York, so if you take the state and local taxes, you combine it, it's 12.5%. So that would mean if this bill passes, you just gave him $160 million in his pocket. That's an interesting number, $160 million. I wonder how $160 million, if that's how much he would save, how would that affect him? Well, I just read a couple reports, Mr. Speaker. Do you know Michael Bloomberg just put $100 million in to Florida to win it for Joe Biden? And another interesting report, he has given the Democrats $60 million to help them try to keep the majority this year, Mr. Speaker. And what's even more interesting, Michael Bloomberg ran for president. And when he was on stage, you know what he said? He said he bought the Democrats a majority. He said he spent $100 million. He bragged about the individuals that he was able to spend that money on. Some people would wonder, is that money well spent? Some people might wonder if they read that bill, $160 million. What does that mean to the person who's unemployed? I don't think Mike Bloomberg needs that. I know a lot of small businesses. I know a lot of unemployed workers that need the money. But you chose somebody else to respond to. You chose somebody else to reward. Shame on you. Instead of guaranteeing common sense protections against frivolous lawsuits for schools, for small business, for child care, for churches, it gives amnesty, work visas, and taxpayer-funded stimulus checks to illegal immigrants. Lots of times when you read a bill, you see what you prioritize. Instead of boosting jobs, it bails out the cannabis industry. Have you read your own bill? In fact, it mentions cannabis more than it mentions jobs. Did you read the bill? It mentions cannabis more than it mentions jobs. I would challenge anybody in this body to name me one time in their district, in one meeting, that it got mentioned cannabis more than it mentioned jobs of what you're going through right now. Our districts may be different, but I don't believe anybody has that. Instead of reopening the economy, it releases criminals to our communities. Democrats think the economy should be locked down, but they don't think serial killers should be locked up. But the Speaker's latest bill does have a noteworthy difference from the original. At a time when the left-wing mobs are creating chaos in our cities, the bill unequivocally embraces the left defund the police agenda. In fact, it removes $600 million of the emergency funding for state and local enforcement and community-oriented policing that was in the first bill. That's where you cut. Democrats actually believe the top priority of Congress is fewer cops and more criminals. Again, sometimes when you read the bills, it lets people to know their priorities. I listened to the Speaker before. She always told me, bills show your values. I heard the Speaker recently said, the Democrats' values are different than Republicans. If these are your values, yes, they are. Yes, they are. Another striking difference is the tens of billions of dollars for public education to combat misinformation about the coronavirus vaccine. Mr. Speaker, I was happy to hear my colleague on the other side speak a little earlier about the vaccine. I was excited because the Democrat nominee for president and the person he chose to be his running mate doesn't think people should take the vaccine, even though it's going to be safe and effective and save people's lives. It's interesting. The individual who's running for president on the Democrat side said he is the Democratic Party. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Speaker Pelosi actively spread in public over the last few weeks misinformation about an ability to save lives. American families, workers, and small businesses will continue to pay the price for Democrats' refusal to take this crisis seriously. It doesn't have to be this way. That's the worst part of all this. It doesn't have to be this way. As the past several months have proven, targeted and timely relief related to COVID hardship actually works. 50 million people got a paycheck because of PPP. I can't tell you how many people got laid off for every time Speaker Pelosi has delayed our bills. I can't tell you how many households and how many businesses have gone bankrupt because she didn't keep her word and say we would stay here and do it. I can't tell you how many more people wonder if their kids can go to college because Nancy Pelosi, our Speaker, called us back for an emergency, but it wasn't about COVID. Instead of using America's suffering as leverage to pass a socialist agenda, Congress should be working on getting the American people back to work safely and back to school safely. Republicans have spent months using every tool available to minority to build on the CARES Act and get support to Main Street. You know, the American public actually ought to see how people vote here. Because just yesterday, we put on the floor a vote for PPP. Every single Democrat voted no. Every single one. It's something they've already supported before. Money is already sitting there, more than $130 billion. This month, Our efforts culminated in a discharge petition to reopen the Paycheck Protection Program, which I've said have already saved 51 million jobs. Mr. Speaker, to the American public, what does a discharge petition mean? You see, the Speaker, whoever he or she is, has all the power. They can determine what comes to the floor. But a discharge petition gives the power to the members. All it takes is 218 members to sign it. The public knows what it is. All it would do is take the money that is there for the Paycheck Protection Program and make sure the bill comes to the floor and can be voted on. It'll be really telling to know how many people back home say they support it and how many times they come here and are fearful. Fearful of if there are threats if they sign the discharge petition. The petition is being led by Ranking Member Steve Chabot and Jamie Herrera Butler. I want to thank both of them. Because you know what they have done? They put the American people first. Steve Chabot, Ranking Member of Small Business. When we were crafting the CARES bill, where the PPP was created, yes, it was him who worked so hard to make sure the small business, those who are employed by him, got resources. He did an amazing job. Jamie Herrera Butler, probably one of the most bipartisan members in this body. They didn't do it for political gain. They did it because they listened to their district. As of Friday, this common sense solution officially became open for signatures. Just 218 to earn a vote on the floor. I think it deserves a vote. I think if you took it to the public, they'd pick that a lot sooner than they'd pick what this bill is doing. Mr. Speaker, every member of this body must make a choice tonight. Members who endorse the Speaker's reckless actions can vote yes on this recycled liberal wish list. Then they can go home and explain to small businesses in their district why they prioritized politics over people. They could stand up and say, no, we worked hard for cannabis, a lot harder than we worked for jobs. We made sure the police got cut, and we made sure Mike Bloomberg got paid back. That the $160 million that he's spending in the campaign today, he'll get it all back because the taxpayers will pay him for it. That's exactly what this bill does. It could be the Michael Bloomberg.
All right, this is Andrew Kraft with News Now from Fox. You've been listening to the House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy there on the House floor rail against the Democrats' proposed $2.2 trillion coronavirus relief bill. They're debating that bill in the chamber right there. You're looking at a live look to the lower right of your screen of the Capitol Dome in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. It's about a little after 7 p.m. there. We want to take you over to one of the main events of October. Every October is the Al Smith Dinner out of New York City, but due to the coronavirus, it's being held virtually this year. Cardinal Timothy Dolan, the Archbishop of the New York Diocese, usually attends and hosts, but you're going to be hearing from former Vice President Joe Biden and President Trump with pre-taped remarks. But let's go to Cardinal Dolan right now, who's at St. Patrick's Cathedral.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We stand before you, dear Heavenly Father, as one nation under God. That's a hope, hardly a boast. We profess in God we trust, admitting that at times